Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into one of the gentlest and most unsettling questions we've ever whispered to ourselves in a quiet moment. If time travel were real, would you go back only to watch your past, or would you try to change it? It sounds simple at first, like choosing between observing a memory or editing a page in a diary. But beneath that simplicity lies an entire landscape of delicate possibilities and quiet, trembling consequences. Before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly enjoy these slow wanderings through wonder. And when you're ready, feel free to leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always heartwarming to see how these calm explorations gather dreamers from every direction on the map, each sitting in their own little pocket of the night. Now, if you'd like, dim the lights a bit. Maybe let the room fall still until the air feels soft around you. You can imagine yourself floating in a warm and quiet darkness, almost like the calm space between stars where even time seems to move with patience. And as you breathe slowly, let your mind drift gently. Tonight, we'll step carefully into the question of what it means to look back, whether the past is something fixed, like a photograph sealed in glass, or something more fluid, like ripples in a lake that change when touched. We'll explore whether a past moment can be watched without being altered, and whether choosing to rewrite it would reshape everything you've ever known. And if your thoughts begin to wander as we drift, that's perfectly fine. Let them go. The story will still be here, unfolding softly in the background. As you settle into this quiet space, we'll begin with the most human temptation of all, the desire to turn around and look back at the path you walked to arrive here. There's a particular kind of silence that settles over you when you think about your past. Not the kind that feels empty, but a softer one, like dust floating in the last golden light of evening. You might not even notice it at first. It appears the moment someone asks, if you could travel back in time, where would you go? It's such a simple question, yet it unlocks a whole landscape inside you. Perhaps you'd return to a childhood room filled with sunlight that no longer exists, or a street corner where a single decision shaped the direction of your life. Maybe you'd revisit a moment of joy that felt too fleeting, or maybe you'd linger at the edge of a mistake you still carry with you. The truth is, you've already imagined this kind of travel countless times without realizing it. Every time you pause while washing dishes or stare through a bus window without really seeing the world outside, your mind quietly takes you back. In those little daydreams, you might drift toward a moment where you wish you had said something different, done something better, or simply held on a little longer. Yet those gentle revisits fade the moment you blink. They feel more like dreams than travels, soft shadows of what used to be. But imagine, just for a moment, that a time machine appeared in front of you. Not a clattering metal box or a glowing portal, but something much simpler. Something that feels almost like a choice whispered into your ear. Do you want to go back, it asks, not to change anything, not yet, just to watch. The temptation is immediate. You might think of that one day when everything changed, or that one afternoon you wish you could relive, not to interfere, but simply to understand it better. There's a certain longing there, the kind that settles deep in your chest, like a soft ache for clarity, or closure, or just a second chance at seeing things as they really were. Would you go back to watch the happiest moment of your life unfold, the way someone you loved smiled at you, or the way the air felt warm and forgiving? Or would you go back to the moments that still sting a little, thinking that perhaps if you could see them from the outside, they would finally make sense? There's something strangely peaceful about the idea of observing without touching, like standing behind a sheet of glass. You're close enough to feel the memory breathe, yet far enough not to disturb a single second. But observation has its own weight. Even in everyday life, simply watching something changes how you understand it. You might replay a failed conversation in your mind and realize that the other person looked tired or nervous or hurt in a way you hadn't noticed before. You might suddenly see how small details connected together, forming a pattern you missed at the time. Even without touching the past, the act of looking at it can shift the way it lives inside you. The temptation grows stronger when you remember the moments you wish you could have saved yourself from. There's something tender and heartbreaking about imagining yourself standing beside your younger self, watching them cry or hesitate or trust the wrong person. You might want to whisper a warning, even though this version of you is invisible and weightless and cannot intervene. It's a bittersweet fantasy, being there without being able to help. Yet there's beauty in that helplessness too. To observe without altering anything is to understand your past in its purest form, undisturbed, unchanged, exactly as it unfolded, like watching a leaf fall through still air, following the only path it could ever take. Perhaps that's why people often say they want closure. What they really want is the chance to observe a moment until it no longer hurts, until its edges grow soft. And so the temptation to turn around is not really about fixing the past. It begins as something quieter, a simple desire to witness your own story again, free from the blindness you had the first time, to finally see the moment clearly, to understand it with a gentle distance of time. As we continue drifting through these ideas, we'll step a little deeper into what watching the past truly means. Not in daydreams, but in the strange physics that shape the flow of time itself. When you imagine watching your own past, the first picture that often comes to mind is something simple and quietly magical, like standing in the doorway of an old room while your younger self moves through it, unaware of the visitor from the future. It feels peaceful at first, almost comforting, as though memory itself has turned into a soft lantern guiding you through a familiar darkness. But the moment you step closer, something subtle happens. You begin to realize that observing the past isn't as delicate or passive as the word watching suggests. It is, in its own way, an encounter, one that reshapes both the memory and the meaning you attach to it. In everyday life, you already experience glimpses of this strange relationship between seeing and interpreting. When you look through old photographs, you might notice details you missed when the moment was new. A hand resting gently on your shoulder, the reflection of sunlight on a window, or the way your eyes seemed tired or hopeful or unsure. Those details were always there, yet somehow invisible to the version of you who lived that moment. It's only when you return to it later, with the quiet weight of time behind you, that the scene seems to deepen and widen. The same thing happens when you listen to an old voice message, or reread a conversation you saved years ago. The words haven't changed, but your understanding of them has. Maybe you see affection where you once saw nothing at all, or sadness where you thought everything was ordinary. Sometimes you even find answers hidden between the lines, waiting for a future version of you who has learned enough to finally see them. These small experiences are reminders that the past is not a fixed set of images on a shelf. It's more like a room you keep revisiting, each time with slightly different eyes. And if this is true for simple memories, imagine how it might feel to observe the moment physically, not in your mind, but with your whole presence, to stand there and watch it unfold again, second by second. If such observation were possible, it would raise an interesting question. Is looking ever truly gentle? Even now, in the present, watching something can change how it behaves. Not in the mystical sense, but in the way a gaze can shift the atmosphere of a room. If you've ever tried to focus on a sleeping pet, or glanced at a child drawing quietly in the corner, you might have noticed how your attention seems to change. The feeling of the scene. The pet stirs, sensing something. The child glances up. Even the soft moment seems to stretch or become more fragile, as if your awareness has added another thread to it. Scientists sometimes describe this quality in a way that sounds technical, but the heart of the idea is simple. The act of observing is rarely as passive as we imagine. To put it gently for a bedtime thought, watching the world is a little like touching the surface of a still pond. Even if your finger only brushes the water, small ripples spread outward. They may be delicate, barely visible, but they're there. And if the past is like a pond, an old quiet one, then entering it as an observer might create ripples you don't intend. But what if the universe already expects your presence? What if certain moments are so deeply woven into the tapestry of your life that returning to watch them wouldn't disturb anything at all, simply because your presence was always meant to be part of the pattern? Some models of time imagine the past as something like a landscape, unchangeable, but able to hold footprints that were always supposed to be there. In those pictures, when you observe a moment, you don't alter it. You fulfill a role that was already accounted for, like stepping onto a stage where the spotlight was waiting for you long before you arrived. There's something strangely comforting in that idea. The past stays steady, no matter how many times you visit it, because the story of your life was always meant to include the quiet traveller you become in the future. But even that kind of observation has emotional weight. Standing inside a past moment with new understanding could make joys sweeter and regrets heavier. It might reveal hidden tenderness in scenes you once misunderstood, or illuminate subtleties you were too young to notice. Imagine watching a moment when someone cared for you deeply and realizing only now how visible it truly was. Or picture yourself witnessing a choice you once judged harshly, only to notice how frightened or tired or confused your younger self had been. You might feel compassion rise for the version of you who didn't know what would come next. Observing the past could bring healing, but it could also reopen old wounds in a way that feels strangely raw. There's another side to this too, one that's more ethical than emotional. Observing a moment also means witnessing others at their most private. Even if you are invisible and silent, the question remains, do you have the right to watch a memory that belongs not only to you, but to someone else who shared the moment? A memory is rarely a solitary thing. It's often a shared space between people. That shared space carries its own boundaries. If you revisit it, you step into the quiet corners of someone else's life. And even if you don't touch a single thread of that moment, you're still stepping into it with knowledge they never agreed to share twice. All of these thoughts begin to show that watching the past is not just a matter of stepping through a doorway. It is an experience layered with emotion, interpretation, and quiet responsibility. The past is not simply a collection of scenes. It's a living archive of who you were and who everyone around you is becoming. To observe it with the full awareness of your present self is to open that archive carefully, knowing that its contents might change you in ways you didn't expect. As we drift further on this journey, we'll explore whether the past is truly something you can visit at all, or if what you find when you look back is simply another version of yourself reflected in a memory's quiet glass. When you close your eyes and imagine your past, it often feels like a distant hallway in a quiet house. Some doors open easily, revealing memories still warm with light. Others remain shut, their handles cold, their hinges stiff. Yet whether they open or not, the hallway feels real, like a place that still exists somewhere, even if you can no longer walk its floors. This simple feeling leads to one of the oldest questions in both philosophy and physics. Is the past something that still exists, or is it only something you carry within you? It might seem like a purely emotional question at first, something woven from nostalgia and longing, but it reaches much deeper. Whether the past is still there affects whether time travel makes any sense at all, whether watching a past moment would mean stepping into a preserved room of the universe, or simply replaying a recording your mind kept. To explore this, we don't need heavy equations or symbols. Instead, we can lean gently on metaphors that have been used for centuries. Images of time as a river, a tree, a growing block of crystal. These pictures allow us to understand deep ideas without letting the mind work too hard. They guide us the way a lantern guides a wanderer through dim woods, softly, without rush. One of the most influential ideas is the block universe, an image that treats time like a vast sculpture carved from a single piece of stone. In this sculpture, every moment, past, present, and future, exists together like different rooms in a mansion built beyond ordinary space. You inhabit one of those rooms right now, but the others haven't vanished. They stand quietly where they always were. If this model is right, then the moment when you took your first steps, or the moment you said something you still regret, still lies within the structure of the universe, preserved the way old letters remain tucked in a dusty drawer. This might feel strange, even unsettling, because it challenges the everyday feeling that the past is gone and the future hasn't yet arrived. But if time is truly a landscape rather than a moving spotlight, then travelling to the past would simply mean walking to a different location in that landscape. You wouldn't rewrite anything. You would only visit a room that was always part of the structure. The walls would be the same, the air the same, the moment exactly as it once happened, untouched and unchangeable. There's a gentle comfort in this idea. It means the happiest versions of you, the child laughing, the friend embracing someone they love, the young adult discovering something new, are all still there in the universe, held safely in the quiet chambers of time. But the model also carries a quiet sadness. If those moments are fixed in place, then so are your mistakes, your losses, and the choices you wish you could take back. You cannot rewrite a room in a sculpture without reshaping the entire structure, and the structure of the universe is too vast for human hands to carve again. Another model imagines time as a growing block, something like a tree adding new rings with each passing moment. In this picture, the past and present exist, solid and real, while the future waits to be grown. This model feels slightly more intuitive. It matches the sense that you can look back at your younger self with certainty, but you cannot yet see the version of you 5 years ahead. The difference between this and the block universe is subtle but meaningful. In the growing block, you cannot visit moments that do not exist yet because the tree has not grown them. But the past is as real as the bark beneath your hand. Then there's presentism, a model that treats only the current moment as real, like a single candle flame flickering in the dark. The past would be like burned out wax behind it, and the future untouched wax ahead. Only the flame exists. Only the now is real. This is the model that matches the natural feeling of time passing, the sensation that the past slips away as soon as it is lived. But as comforting as presentism may feel, it struggles with certain truths about the universe. Light from distant galaxies shows us scenes that are millions of years old. The star you see tonight may have died long ago, yet its light still travels toward you. So when you look at the night sky, you are literally looking into the past, not a memory, but a physical echo that still exists. In this sense, the universe behaves more like the block or the growing block models, holding on to its past in quiet, elegant ways. These models reshape how we think about time travel. In a block universe, returning to the past doesn't change anything. It simply means visiting a room that has always existed. In a growing block universe, you might step into a chamber that is already built, its walls firm and unaltered. But in presentism, the past doesn't exist to be visited at all. You could remember it, imagine it, dream it, but not enter it, because there is nothing left to enter. And yet, memory complicates this in a tender way. When you remember a past moment, it doesn't feel gone. It feels present. It lives in your mind as though it continues to exist somewhere invisible. Neuroscientists often say memory is a reconstruction, not a replay, a story your brain weaves from stored fragments. But even that description is gentle enough to suggest that you carry small pieces of your past with you, like cracked seashells collected from a beach, long washed clean by waves. This blending of memory and physics creates a quiet realization. Even if the universe keeps its past intact, you experience that past through the lens of who you are now. Observing a moment from your life, whether through a machine or through the soft corridors of thought, means stepping into a room shaped as much by your present understanding as by the original walls. The past is a place that shifts quietly, depending on the version of you who visits it. As we continue drifting through this exploration, we'll step from these models of time into the delicate question that lies just beneath them. If the past is still there, and if you can walk into it as a silent observer, can you truly avoid leaving a trace? When people imagine observing their past, they often picture a scene frozen under glass. They imagine stepping quietly into an old memory the way one might enter a museum at night. Soft footsteps echoing, lights dim, every object exactly where it once was. In that vision, they watch without being noticed. They gather insight without leaving a trace. But the more carefully we think about this, the more we begin to see that watching is never as gentle or invisible as we hope. Every act of observation carries its own subtle gravity, a kind of presence that shapes what it touches, even if the touch is too faint to feel at first. We experience this truth every day without naming it. Think of moments when someone stares at you from across a room. You feel it before you see it. Or moments when you glance at a friend deep in thought and they suddenly look up as if called by a whisper. There is something about attention that changes reality, gently but unmistakably. Even within the privacy of your own mind, revisiting a painful memory can shift its colours. A moment you once thought was ordinary becomes meaningful. A moment you believed to be simple becomes layered. The act of looking again reshapes what is being seen. Scientists sometimes describe this idea through what they call the observer effect, which sounds complex but is rooted in a simple truth. Watching something is a form of participation. In the smallest realms of nature, where particles move like tiny flickers of possibility, rather than solid objects, even a gentle measurement is like shining a flashlight into a dark room. The light doesn't only reveal what is there, it nudges it slightly. Instead of thinking in terms of formulas, imagine holding a delicate snowflake under a warm breath. You're not trying to change it, but the warmth from your lungs shifts its shape anyway. If this is how observation works in the present, imagine how delicate observation becomes when directed toward the past. Suppose you step quietly into an old moment, your childhood kitchen perhaps, or a street corner where you once hesitated before making a choice you now question. You tell yourself you're only watching. You make yourself as light as a shadow or as soft as a breeze. Yet the simple act of looking brings with it a new understanding, a new emotional weight, and a new meaning. Even though you promise never to interfere, you cannot help but let the past leave a different imprint on you than before. Then the question begins to shift. If watching changes you, does it also change the moment you entered? One way to imagine this is through the metaphor of a still pond at dusk. When you touch the water's surface, even with the softest fingertip, ripples spread outward. but even your reflection staring down into the pond can disturb the surface. Your presence changes the angle of light, the pattern of tiny insects dancing above the water, the way a passing fish senses movement. None of this is loud or disruptive. It is simply the quiet truth that presence is never neutral. But perhaps the past is not a pond that responds to your presence in fragile ripples. Perhaps it is more like a river that flows according to rules deeper than your fingertips can reach. Some models of time suggest that if you were ever to step into a past moment, that moment already includes your presence. In other words, you're not entering as a foreign visitor, you're fulfilling a role that has always been part of the timeline. Like an actor appearing in a scene that was already written for them long ago, you do not rewrite anything because your presence is woven into the original script. This idea, that the universe naturally avoids contradictions, can be imagined without heavy terminology. Picture time as a tapestry. Every thread is looped and woven with awareness of the others. If you in the future walk back into a moment, the tapestry simply tightens its weave around the place where you stand. It makes room for you not by changing the pattern, but by acknowledging that the thread of your life bends in a loop and touches an earlier part of the cloth. Nothing breaks, nothing tears. The tapestry remains whole. Yet even this elegant model brings with it a quiet strangeness. If the past always knew you would return to watch, then every action of your younger self unfolded under the faint influence of a future watcher. Your presence echoing backward along the thread of time. Perhaps your younger self felt a strange calm at a moment when panic seemed likely, or sensed the warmth of reassurance without knowing why. Such impressions would not be interference. They would be gentle echoes of your future self's gaze folded invisibly into the moment. And then there is the more unsettling possibility. What if watching, even silently, nudges events in ways too small to notice but too real to deny? A tiny shift in posture, a flutter of intuition, a moment of hesitation that did not exist in the original version of history. If the past is sensitive to such subtle disturbances, then observing it could be like breathing gently across a deck of cards. The arrangement might look unchanged, but one card might lean ever so slightly on another, ready to fall differently when the time comes. But before this thought becomes too heavy, it's worth remembering that time is not fragile in the same way human emotions are. The universe does not unspool simply because someone looks at it. If the past ever allows observation, it likely does so under rules far more resilient than our imagination suggests. Rules that ensure the moment you observe remains unchanged, even if your understanding of it transforms. The final question, then, is not whether observing the past changes the past. It's whether observing the past changes you, and whether the version of you who returns is still the same person who left. Watching a moment unfold exactly as it once did could soften old pain, but it could also deepen it. It could give clarity, or it could awaken a tender ache for something long gone. And if you come back different, the present you return to may feel slightly altered, not because the timeline shifted, but because you have. As we continue drifting through this idea, we'll step from this quiet dilemma into an even softer mystery. If mere observation carries such hidden weight, what happens when you try to step beyond watching into changing? There is something quietly comforting about imagining that the past might already know you, that if you were ever to return to a moment long gone, your presence would not be a disruption, but simply a forgotten part of the scene finally stepping into its rightful place. It paints a vision of time not as a fragile thread that snaps when touched, but as a woven ribbon, looping and curving in ways that feel smooth and natural. To understand this idea gently, without the cold edges of equations or symbols, we can picture time as a long pathway through a forest. Most people walk it in a straight line, noticing each clearing only once. But some paths bend back on themselves, returning to earlier glades. If you ever walked such a path, the forest would not be surprised to see you again. It would be as calm and accepting as it was the first time. This is the spirit behind one of the softest and most elegant ideas ever proposed about time, the belief that loops in time must be self-consistent, not forced, not rigid, but quietly harmonious. According to this picture, if you stepped into a past moment, you wouldn't shatter anything, because the universe would only allow the kind of loop that completes itself rather than contradicts. It would be like fitting a puzzle piece back into a place it always belonged. To get a sense of how this works, imagine a simple and gentle story. Picture your younger self standing at a crossroads, hesitating. Maybe it was the day you decided which school to attend, or the moment you chose between two job offers, or the hour you chose to stay instead of leaving. Now imagine that your older self is there too, watching quietly from the shadows, not interfering, but present. In this looped moment, your younger self might feel a faint sense of calm, or fear, or confidence that they cannot explain. They act in a way that feels natural, even though something unseen is gently nudging the edges of their emotions. Now imagine that years later you return as your older self to watch that moment, and you realize with a soft sense of wonder that the feeling your younger self had, whether calm or hesitant or bold, came from your presence, not because you changed anything intentionally, but because your existence in that moment was always part of the pattern. The loop closes, the story fits, nothing contradicts, nothing unravels. This kind of loop is not a paradox, it is a harmony. It suggests that if time allows you back, it will only permit the version of events that already includes you. In this way, your presence in the past doesn't rewrite the moment, it completes it. To deepen this image, imagine a small canal with a wooden boat drifting in a circle. If someone standing on the bank gently taps the water, creating ripples, those ripples are carried around the loop. When the boat reaches a certain point, it might bob slightly in response. Not because the future changed the past, but because every motion in the canal is part of a single, shared system. Your future presence becomes a natural part of the past's unfolding. Just as the past once shaped the future, there is no contradiction, only a delicate exchange of influence that feels smooth and balanced. One of the most poetic images that helps us understand this idea is that of an echo. When you stand at the mouth of a canyon and call out, the sound that returns feels like a separate voice, but it is simply your original call travelling a different path. Now imagine that time behaves like this canyon. A moment from your future might echo backward into the past, and when you eventually return to witness that moment, you realise that the faint, inexplicable feeling your younger self experienced was simply your own voice returning by a longer route. Again, the loop closes, the pattern fits. In such a world, time travel would never let you break your own history, just as an echo never drowns out the original sound. It only harmonises with it. Your presence becomes part of the moment, but not a part that disrupts. Instead, it is a part that was always meant to be there. This realization changes the way we imagine time. Instead of a single line moving forward, it becomes a flowing pattern where certain threads bend backward but never tangle. Instead of a rigid structure vulnerable to disruption, time becomes a tapestry with loops that strengthen the weave. And instead of worrying that time travel might allow someone to erase themselves or rewrite their destiny, we can imagine a world where every loop is quietly self-correcting, gently steering events toward versions that remain consistent. There is a quiet wisdom in this. It suggests that even if you could travel to a difficult moment in your life, The universe might not allow you to change the outcome, but it might allow you to understand it better. And if your presence could influence your younger self at all, it would be only in ways that already happened, in ways that helped shape you into the person you now are. This raises an interesting emotional truth. Perhaps some of the strange intuitions you felt in your youth, the sudden urge to turn left instead of right, the inexplicable calm before a storm, the quiet whisper of reassurance that came from nowhere, might not have been imagination. They might have been the soft footprint of your future self, watching from a place you haven't yet reached. Not to change anything, only to witness, only to complete the loop. There's something deeply comforting in that idea. It suggests that even in your loneliest moments, you are not entirely alone. A future version of you might have been there, standing just beyond the edge of awareness, keeping silent company with the past version of you who needed it most. As we drift deeper into these ideas, we'll begin to step into a more intricate part of the journey, where loops become more than harmony, and where the temptation to reach out, to touch, to intervene rises like a soft impulse in the dark. When people imagine time travel, they often picture something abrupt, a sudden flash of light, a door slamming shut between two eras, a jump that feels like leaping across an impossible gap. But if we soften our thinking and step away from dramatic images, we find a gentler way to picture the idea. Instead of a jump, what if time simply curved? What if, instead of a straight line stretching endlessly forward, time bent like a long, winding trail on a hillside? If such curves exist, then walking along them might bring you naturally back to a place you've already been, not because you forced your way into the past, but because the path itself simply loops. To understand this, imagine strolling through a quiet forest at dusk. The path beneath your feet winds between tall trees and slips behind hills. You walk without thinking about direction, lost in the rhythm of your steps. And after a while, you find yourself standing in a familiar clearing, the same one you passed an hour ago. You didn't teleport, you didn't break any rules, you simply followed a trail that curved back to where it began. Now imagine that time might have similar curves, invisible but real, smooth enough to carry you from one moment back to another. This image captures the essence of what many scientists describe when they talk about curved paths in the structure of time. Instead of using symbols or equations, we can simply say that gravity can shape the flow of moments the way hills shape the flow of water. A massive object, a star, a planet, even something far stranger, might bend the timeline around it. In extremely rare and exotic circumstances, that bend might become so sharp that the path loops. Following that loop would carry you not just to a different place, but to a different moment. Some people imagine these bends as tunnels, doorways connected by hidden hallways. These are often called wormholes, a word that sounds strange but really just describes a shortcut. Picture two distant rooms connected by a narrow secret walkway hidden behind a bookshelf. If you enter the walkway from one room, you appear instantly in the other, no matter how far apart they originally seemed. Now imagine the walkway doesn't just connect places, it connects times. And imagine one end of that hallway moves differently than the other, like one door aging faster or slower. As strange as it sounds, this could make one doorway lead not only to a different location, but to an earlier moment in your life story. Another way to picture curved time is by imagining a whirlpool, not of water, but of moments. If time flows around a spinning object the way water flows around a stone, the spin might twist the flow into a spiral. In certain extreme conditions, this spiral might tighten into a loop. Travelling into such a twist would feel like drifting into the eye of a storm, where the wind circles back toward where it came from. But even as we imagine these shapes, curves, tunnels, spirals, we must remember something gentle and grounding. The universe does not offer shortcuts casually. For a loop in time to exist, everything must be just right, the way a soap bubble needs exactly the right balance of air and tension to hold its shape. If the bubble is too thin, it pops. If the air shifts too quickly, it collapses. Time, if it ever forms loops, would likely be just as delicate. Still, there is a soft beauty in imagining a curved landscape of moments. It suggests that returning to your past doesn't require violence or force. You wouldn't need to tear open the timeline or cut through the fabric of reality. You would simply walk along a path already laid down long ago, trusting that the curve will bring you back to a familiar clearing. And because the path is part of the universe itself, stepping into the past would feel less like breaking a rule and more like completing a circle. This idea also helps us understand why time might allow travel only under specific circumstances. You wouldn't be allowed to appear somewhere that contradicts the shape of the path. You couldn't leap to any moment you wished. You could only follow loops that already exist, loops woven into the landscape of time in ways too subtle for ordinary senses to detect. And this means something profound. If you ever find yourself in the past, the moment you arrive might feel strangely calm because the universe has already accounted for your footsteps. You're not surprising the timeline. You're simply walking a path it quietly prepared. Imagine visiting a childhood memory through such a loop. You walk slowly into the moment, expecting to feel like an intruder, but instead you feel as though the scene is welcoming you. Your younger self might glance about as if sensing a shift in the air, nothing frightening, only a faint recognition. The light might fall on the floorboards in a familiar way, yet something about the shadows feels as if they're making space for you. You stand there in silence, unsure whether you're witnessing the past or fulfilling a role that was always meant to be part of it. This way of thinking brings a peaceful acceptance. It lets us imagine time not as a rigid line, but as a natural landscape, full of bends and quiet loops that shape our stories in ways we rarely notice. It suggests that maybe, just maybe, there are moments in your past that were built to hold a future version of you, not to change anything, but simply to be present, to witness, to complete a loop you never realized existed. If such loops are possible, the universe might use them sparingly, the way nature uses rare conditions to create a rainbow or a delicate ring of frost around a leaf. But even imagining them changes how we think about time. It makes the past feel less like something locked behind a door, and more like a distant but reachable place, a clearing in the forest that you might someday find again. And as we continue wandering through this landscape, we edge closer to a more emotional truth, that watching the past can bring answers, but it can also stir old feelings you may not be prepared to meet. If you imagine yourself standing inside a past moment, really standing there as a silent visitor, you might first think of how comforting it would feel. The idea carries a gentle sweetness, like finding a forgotten photograph tucked into the pages of a book. You picture a happier version of yourself running through a sunlit field or laughing with someone you once held close. It becomes easy to believe that rewatching such a moment would warm you the way a soft blanket warms your shoulders on a chilly night. But once you settle into that memory, once you breathe the same air your younger self once breathed, you realize that watching the past is heavier than it appears, as though the moment carries its own quiet gravity. One part of this weight comes from recognizing details you missed the first time. When you revisit a joyful memory, you might notice the way your younger self's eyes sparkled with a kind of innocence you no longer carry, or how the world seemed wider because you had not yet encountered the disappointments that shaped you later. You might see love in the small gestures of someone who is no longer part of your life. And while these realizations can bring tenderness, they can also stir a longing so deep it feels like a distant ache in the heart. Joy, when observed from afar, often carries a layer of sadness, the sadness of knowing it cannot return in the same form. And then there are the more difficult moments. If you find yourself watching a memory that once hurt you, the experience can be startling. You might see your younger self curled up alone in a room, crying quietly, trying to hide the tremble in their hands. You might notice how small they look, how fragile. You might wish more fiercely than ever that you could step forward, kneel beside them, and whisper something to ease their pain. But you can't, not because the universe forbids you, but because the rules of visiting the past require you to remain silent, a gentle shadow observing from the corner. The ache that comes with this powerlessness is its own kind of burden. Even if the moment taught you strength later on, seeing it unfold again feels like reading a chapter you once lived through, one where you already know every line. Sometimes the weight comes not from sadness or joy, but from clarity. Memory has a way of blurring the edges of experience, softening some details while sharpening others. But the moment itself, if revisited, would reveal things you didn't understand at the time. You might realize that a person you trusted wore a worried expression you never noticed, or that someone who seemed indifferent was actually trying, in their own quiet way, to be kind. You might even see how your own actions contributed to a moment you once blamed entirely on someone else. Such clarity can feel like a soft light shining into a dusty room. It helps you understand, yes, but it also shifts the shapes of your memories, altering the stories you've told yourself for years. Watching the past can unravel old narratives and weave new ones, not by changing the timeline, but by changing you, the observer. Another emotional layer comes from the strange sensation of seeing yourself as someone else. When you watch your younger self from outside your own body, you aren't reliving the moment, you're witnessing it. That version of you becomes a character in a story rather than the narrator. You might feel compassion toward them, or frustration, or even bewilderment. Why didn't they see the truth? Why did they choose that path? Why did they speak so quickly, or so harshly, or so softly? And in this gentle distance, you discover something humbling. Your younger self was doing the best they could with the understanding they had at the time. Seeing this version of yourself through the eyes of who you've become can be surprisingly healing. It allows you to forgive mistakes you've held onto for too long. It reminds you that the person you were was simply trying to navigate a world that often felt too big, too confusing, too unexpected. But healing comes with its own weight. It requires confronting emotions you've tucked away in the quiet spaces of your memory, and while rewatching the past may offer closure, it may also stir feelings you weren't expecting. There is another, more subtle weight, the presence of people who are no longer in your life. Revisiting a moment with someone who has drifted away, someone you grew apart from, or someone who has passed on, can feel like standing in the doorway of a room where time has stopped. You see them smile, unaware of the years that stretch ahead. You hear their voice, unchanged. You witness a version of them that no longer exists in the present world. This can bring immense comfort, but it can also reopen quiet grief, the kind that sits at the back of the mind like a folded letter, never fully read. And then there is the weight of witnessing a moment where you hurt someone else. Observing your past self causing pain, whether intentionally or not, can be one of the heaviest experiences of all. The memory might once have felt blurred or justified or softened by time, but seeing it again, clearly and from the outside, can spark a gentle shame. Yet even this can carry a hidden kindness. It can teach you how far you've grown, how differently you might act now, how mistakes can become stepping stones rather than chains. This entire emotional landscape shows that rewatching your life is not merely a passive action. It is a conversation between who you were and who you are. When you stand in past moment, the moment does not change, but you do. You walk away carrying new tenderness, new understanding, or new questions. You return to the present with a heavier or lighter heart, depending on what you found there. And somewhere within this tenderness lies the beginning of a deeper question. If observing alone can reshape your inner world so profoundly, what would it mean to reach out and try to alter the moment itself? There is a moment when imagining time travel that feels strangely irresistible. You picture yourself standing in a familiar scene from long ago, the air unchanged, the light falling exactly as it once did. At first, you simply watch, silent, careful, respectful of the rules you believe the universe has set. But then something inside you stirs, a soft impulse, a whisper, the desire to reach out and mend something delicate, something that once caused pain. It feels harmless. It feels compassionate. It feels like the most human thing in the world. Yet this tiny impulse is where the deepest dangers begin, because changing the past is not like adjusting a loose picture frame. It is more like tugging on a thread woven tightly through a sweater. The moment you pull, the entire pattern begins to loosen. To understand this gently, imagine a long knitted scarf stitched lovingly row by row. Your life is like that scarf, each experience a loop intertwined with countless others. If you try to unloop one small stitch deep in the past, the neighbouring stitches loosen, and then those loosen the ones beside them. What begins as a single tug becomes a quiet unravelling, spreading outward in both directions. At first, the scarf looks unchanged, but then the fabric warps, a hollow forms, and soon the entire weave begins to collapse into itself, thread by thread. This is the essence of what people call paradoxes, not in the technical, mathematical sense, but in the everyday sense of things falling apart when they contradict themselves. The most famous example is often described with sharp logic, but we can imagine it more gently. Picture yourself trying to prevent your own grandparents from meeting because one small encounter led to a chain of events that eventually led to you. If you succeed, then you would never be born. And if you're never born, then you're not there to stop them. But if you're not there to stop them, they meet anyway, and you do get born. And if you're born, you might go back and intervene again. The loop becomes a soft but impossible circle, like trying to look at the back of your own head without turning around. Even in less dramatic moments, the danger hides in small details. Imagine you return to a quiet afternoon where you once made a simple decision to say hello instead of walking past someone, to take a different route home, to accept or refuse an invitation. Those small choices ripple outward in surprising ways. If you decide to change one of them now, thinking it was trivial, you might end up erasing entire friendships, careers, or families that sprang indirectly from that moment. It is almost impossible to see the full outline of consequences from inside a single instant. Life's biggest changes often begin in whispers. Think of a single conversation you almost didn't have, one that later influenced your job, your relationships, or the city you now call home. If you skip that conversation in the past, the entire future shifts. Not only your own, but the futures of everyone who interacted with you thereafter. One missed handshake might change who someone else marries. One delayed apology might alter who they raise a child with. One altered moment could encourage or prevent someone from moving to a new place, starting a new business, or meeting a lifelong friend. In this way, your attempt to fix one tiny fragment of your own story might quietly rewrite the stories of hundreds, like brushstrokes shifting on a painting that stretches far beyond your frame of view. This sensitivity to small changes can be imagined gently using the image of snow high on a mountain. A single snowflake landing in a slightly different spot might be enough to change how the weight of snow distributes along the slope. That slight imbalance, barely visible, might later determine whether an avalanche begins, and when and how it flows. A small nudge today becomes a massive wave later, not because snowflakes have dramatic intentions, but because nature amplifies small differences when they are placed in delicate positions. Our lives are filled with such delicate positions, moments poised right at the edge of possibility, where one blink, one breath, one unspoken word could shift the entire direction of a future we have not yet lived. Attempting to change the past would place you right inside those moments again, not with innocence, but with foresight that makes each choice feel unbearably heavy. Even kinds of changes that seem harmless carry weight. Imagine going back to encourage your younger self to be more confident during an important presentation. You might assume this is a small kindness, one that improves your younger self's life. But what if that newfound confidence leads them down a path that takes them far away from the people you love today? What if an event that once humbled you, something painful but formative, is removed from your story? Would you still grow into the same person? Would you still find empathy, or patience, or resilience in the same places? These are the quiet dangers, not loud contradictions but gentle distortions of identity. Changing a moment in your past might not collapse the timeline violently. Instead, it might cause you, not the universe, to come undone. Your memories of who you are would no longer match the reality around you. People you love might not recognize you, not because they no longer exist, but because the person who built the connection with them never existed in this altered path. And then there is the emotional burden of knowing you caused the change. If you remove a painful moment, but in doing so erase the strength you gained from surviving it, would the loss feel worth it? If you save someone from suffering, but unknowingly create suffering elsewhere, could you live peacefully with that knowledge? This is why many storytellers through the centuries have described the past as something sacred, not because it is perfect, but because it is interconnected. Moments are not isolated, they lean on each other like stones in a riverbed. Shift one stone, and the water's flow changes downstream. The water doesn't collapse into chaos, it simply becomes something else, something unrecognizable. The past may appear fragile under your fingertips, like a delicate flower whose petals you wish to rearrange. But beneath those petals is an intricate root system that stretches deep into the soil of the present. Touching one part touches everything. As we drift deeper into this journey, we begin to see that danger is not the whole story. There is also mystery and curiosity, and the allure of seeing how one tiny moment could transform the world. That is where we go next, not into fear, but into possibility. There is a gentle illusion we carry about our past, that most moments were small, quiet, and contained, that a single conversation, a missed bus, a forgotten message, a change of schedule held meaning only for the day in which it happened. But when you step back and look at your life from a greater height, the way you might look at a forest from the edge of a hill, you begin to see that nothing is truly small. Every choice, every hesitation, every brief encounter stretches its roots outward into the soil of the future. And if you return to the past with the ability to change even the tiniest detail, you place yourself inside a delicate web that responds to the slightest disturbance. Imagine for a moment dropping a pebble into a still lake. The pebble makes only a small splash, barely enough to break the surface. But the ripples that follow move outward, circles widening, overlapping, changing the patterns of leaves floating on the water. A dragonfly nearby lifts off unexpectedly. A fish beneath shifts its path. Even when the surface grows calm again, the after effects continue, invisible but real. Time behaves in much the same way. A single word spoken differently, or not spoken at all, can shift the pattern of events in ways too subtle to imagine in the moment. Take something ordinary, a forgotten email. Perhaps long ago you wrote a message you never sent. In your original timeline, that unsent email caused a small delay. You arrived late to a meeting where you met someone by chance, someone who later introduced you to a job you cherished. If you go back and press send this time, the timeline doesn't break. It simply reroutes. But the new path might lead you elsewhere. A different job, a different city, a different set of friendships you never expected. The change is small, the outcome vast. Or imagine a soft, quiet moment where you once helped someone without thinking much of it, holding open a door, offering a piece of advice, or simply smiling at a person who looked defeated. That tiny gesture might have nudged their day in a direction that changed how they treated someone else, who then influenced another, and so on. If you return to the past and decide to walk a different street that day, that moment disappears. You don't break the world. You simply erase one invisible thread in a tapestry full of interwoven strands, but every thread matters, even if it is thin. These small, interconnected consequences reflect what we often call chaos, not in the sense of noise or disorder, but in its gentlest form, sensitivity. A system that is sensitive is one where small beginnings lead to large endings. A whisper can start a movement. A footstep can start a landslide. A thought, if nurtured long enough, can reshape a life. To picture this sensitivity softly, imagine a field of tall grass. Each stalk stands straight, but a breeze passing through bends them in complex patterns. One small shift in the direction of the breeze changes how shadows move across the field, how insects crawl along the blades, how birds choose to land or fly. The entire field responds to the faintest push of air. The past is like this field, sensitive, responsive, alive in its own quiet way. A deeper layer of this idea involves the natural tendency of things to spread outward, to move from neat arrangement toward wider possibility. Scientists sometimes describe this with the word entropy, but we don't need the term to feel the meaning. You can see it in a drop of ink swirling into a bowl of water. At first, the drop is compact, contained, but as moments pass, the ink spreads into patterns that become wider and wider until they fill the bowl. Undoing such a spreading, forcing all that ink back into a single drop, is nearly impossible. The same is true for time. Once moments spread outward into consequences, gathering them back into their original form requires more force than the universe allows. This is why even a gentle change to the past can become overwhelming in its reach. The moment you alter a small detail, the ripple you create begins to spread. It touches not only the people you know, but the people they know, and the people those people know. A brief comment you choose not to make this time might cause someone else to feel slightly more confident or slightly more discouraged. That feeling might change the choices they make, which then change the lives of those around them. The ripple grows until it becomes a tide, and before long, the world you return to is not the world you left. To bring this idea closer to home, imagine you go back and save someone from a danger that once shaped their life. Perhaps a friend who overcame hardship, or a stranger you once stepped past on a busy street. Saving them feels like a pure kindness, yet that act might alter their path so profoundly that they become someone you no longer recognize, and someone who might never meet the people who later depended on them, the child they would have raised, the friend they would have supported, the invention they would have contributed to. Kindness in one direction might unknowingly cause harm in another, not because you intended it, but because the balance of lives is delicate. In this way, changing the past becomes less a bold adventure and more a quiet, trembling responsibility. Every moment holds a dozen invisible threads stretching into the future. To change one thread might shift the whole pattern, and since you cannot possibly see all the threads at once, no one can, the effort to improve one moment risks unravelling others. Even the idea of fixing your own mistakes becomes complicated. The moments you regret most may have shaped qualities you value in yourself now. Compassion, resilience, patience. Remove the mistake, and you might remove the lesson. You might walk into an altered future feeling lighter, only to discover you have lost something essential along the way. This doesn't mean the past is untouchable because it is sacred. It is untouchable because it is intricate. Its power lies not in its firmness, but in its interconnectedness. And yet, despite these dangers, the imagination still wanders toward possibility. You might still wonder what a single, careful change could bring. Not chaos, but improvement. That curiosity is what leads many to imagine alternatives, ways to alter the past without breaking it, ways to bend time's delicate fabric without tearing it. That curiosity takes us to a strange but beautiful idea, the possibility of loops where information has no clear origin at all, moments that feel like they belong to both the past and the future. There is a certain kind of story that feels both magical and unsettling at the same time. A story where a circle closes so perfectly that you cannot see where it begins or ends. These stories appear in legends, in dreams, in the half-remembered corners of our imagination, and surprisingly in the physics of time travel as well. They describe moments that seem to come from nowhere, like a melody drifting through the air with no singer in sight. This gentle but puzzling idea is sometimes called a bootstrap paradox, but we can understand it without any technical terms at all. It simply asks, what if something existed in the world without ever having an original creator? To imagine this softly, picture a future version of yourself, older, wiser, carrying a lifetime of memories. One day, this future you decides to travel back in time and visit a younger version of yourself who is sitting quietly, trying to write a song. Perhaps the younger you is tapping a pencil against a desk, unsure how to begin. The older you leans in and whispers the melody into your younger self's ear. The younger you writes it down, publishes it years later, and the song becomes famous. But here is the gentle mystery. Who actually composed the song? You learned it from your older self. Who learned it from you? The melody has no origin. It simply exists, held in a loop of time that folds backward on itself. You can imagine similar moments in other forms. A child grows up reading a book that deeply inspires them, only to one day write the same book and bring it back to their childhood self. Or a scientist builds a groundbreaking device using blueprints handed to them by an older traveller, only to realise later that they are the one who will eventually hand those same blueprints to their younger self. The object, the idea, the knowledge, none of it has a beginning. It floats in a circle, passed from one version of yourself to another, like a small gift that never leaves your hands but is always arriving anew. This type of loop feels odd, not because it breaks the rules of logic, but because it gently sidesteps them. We're used to things having origins. We like stories where causes lead clearly to effects the way footsteps lead to fresh tracks in the snow. But in these loops, the footsteps circle so smoothly that you cannot tell where the walk began. It is like drawing a perfect ring in soft sand. Every point leads to the next, and none of them can be called the start. In the context of time travel, these loops raise many quiet questions. If you receive a piece of information from your future self, and then later give that same information back to your younger self, does the idea belong to anyone? Is it yours? Is it the universe's? Or is it a kind of shared thought that simply travels along the curved threads of time? One way to imagine this is to picture a candle flame reflected between two mirrors facing each other. The reflections stretch backward into what seems like infinity. Each reflected flame appears to light the next, but none of them is truly the original. They're all echoes, each contributing to the one in front while depending on the one behind. It is impossible to say where the first reflection began. The circle is complete, and within that circle, the flame simply exists. This gentle paradox carries emotional weight as well. Imagine carrying a memory that does not belong to any specific version of you. You remember learning the melody from your older self, but you also remember teaching it to your younger self. Both memories feel real, both feel personal, yet neither belongs entirely to you because the melody came from neither moment. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Holding such a memory would feel like carrying a whisper whose source you cannot trace. A whisper you are both author and recipient of. The same strangeness applies to objects. Picture returning to the past and handing your younger self an old, worn notebook filled with your best ideas. You tell them it will help guide their life. Years later, they carry the notebook through countless experiences, writing new thoughts and sketches inside it. Eventually, they become the version of you who travels back to the past, and they hand the same notebook to their younger self. The notebook seems ancient, yet timeless. It is filled with writing that came from nowhere. It is a gift with no giver. This sort of loop doesn't necessarily hurt anything. It doesn't unravel the timeline like other changes might. In fact, it can feel strangely stable, self-contained, complete, a closed circle that supports itself. But the emotional effect might be disorienting. You might feel like you're living inside a story without a beginning. You might wonder whether the ideas that shaped your life were truly yours, or whether you inherited them from a version of yourself you haven't yet become. It also raises a gentle question about creativity and identity. If inspiration flows through these loops, does it matter whether it has an origin? Perhaps the meaning of an idea is not tied to when it first existed, but to how it moves through you. A melody, once heard, becomes personal not because you invented it, but because you carried it, shaped it, and allowed it to shape you. A notebook, even if it has no beginning, still bears your handwriting, your sketches, your thoughts. And in that way, it becomes yours, even if its first page was filled before you were born. These loops also reveal something tender about time travel. Not all paradoxes are destructive. Some are quiet, poetic, even beautiful. They show us that the universe may hold mysteries where meaning matters more than origin. Instead of breaking causality, they create soft patterns of self-giving, where your actions reach backward and forward in a continuous gesture of sharing. Yet beneath this beauty lies a deeper question. If time can loop ideas so elegantly, what happens when the loop branches, when your attempt to rewrite the past doesn't create a contradiction, but an entirely new path? That question leads us to a forest of possibilities, where every change becomes a new clearing in the landscape of time. There is a quiet relief that settles in when you realize the universe might be far more generous than you once imagined. Up until now, the idea of changing the past has felt like stepping onto a frozen lake, every move threatening to crack the surface, every action echoing outward into uncertain consequences. But there is another possibility, one whispered by some interpretations of physics and softly imagined by philosophers. The idea that you might change the past without breaking anything at all, not by rewriting the timeline you came from, but by creating a new one, another branch on the vast tree of existence. You can picture this idea most gently by imagining a forest at dawn. The light is dim, and the path before you splits into several clearings. Each clearing is bathed in its own shade of early morning light. One path leads to a moss-covered stone, another toward a quiet stream, another into the dense, shadowy trees. You can choose any of them, and the forest will accept your choice. In this metaphor, each clearing represents a version of reality, a world slightly different from the one beside it. And the moment you step onto a new path, that path becomes your story. The multiverse idea, when stripped of complicated diagrams or symbols, is simply the idea that every possibility might have room to unfold somewhere, not because the universe is chaotic, but because it is generous. If you go back and change a moment, you do not erase the old moment. You simply create another clearing. The original remains exactly as it was, like a well-worn path covered in your old footprints. But now there is a new path beside it, one that holds your new choice. To imagine this in everyday life, think of those small moments where you made a decision without realizing it mattered. Perhaps you stood in a bookstore holding two different novels, choosing one without much thought, or you debated whether to take a left or right turn at a street corner, eventually choosing based on instinct. Those choices felt light, almost weightless, and yet each one set you down a different path, filled with different conversations, different rooms, different people. You don't feel the branching as you walk through life, but looking back it becomes clear that you could have lived hundreds of quiet variations of your story. The multiverse idea simply takes that natural branching of possibility and lets it become literal. It suggests that if you travelled to the past and made a different choice, you would create a new branch, a new clearing, but the original branch would continue untouched. The people you left behind would live the life they always lived. Nothing is lost, nothing is overwritten. You simply step into a different version of events, carrying your memories with you like a traveller stepping through a doorway carved from possibilities. This view softens the fear that changing the past will destroy something precious. Instead of unravelling the sweater of the world, you're knitting a second one beside it. Instead of pulling stones from a riverbed and redirecting the flow of water, you're simply creating another stream that runs parallel to the first. The original remains. The new one flows alongside it, perhaps quieter, perhaps wilder, perhaps filled with unexpected turns. But even with this gentler framework, the emotional questions remain. If you create a new branch, what becomes of the old one? If you save someone from heartbreak in a new world, what happens to the version of them who lived through the heartbreak in the original? Do both lives carry equal meaning, or does one feel more real simply because you chose to follow it? These questions do not break the multiverse, they enrich it. They remind us that every choice, even in imagined physics, carries weight because it involves people, emotions, and the shape of a life. Another way to imagine branching is to picture a library filled with countless books. Each book tells a slightly different story of your life. One version describes you choosing to study abroad. Another describes you staying home. One book holds the chapter where you confessed your feelings to someone you cared about. Another holds the chapter where you kept them quietly hidden. These books sit side by side on the shelf, none erasing the other. If you travel back and make a new decision, you're simply writing an additional book and placing it next to the rest. You're not tearing pages from the others, yet this gentle solution comes with its own quiet burden of responsibility. If you can create a new world by changing the past, how many worlds might you feel tempted to create? If each choice leads to a new timeline, where does your responsibility begin, and where does it end? Imagine saving someone from an accident, only to realise that in another branch, someone else suffers because of the shifting balance of events. The forest of possibilities becomes filled with clearings you shaped, intentionally or not. There is also the emotional question of belonging. If you choose a new timeline, an altered one, Do you remain truly connected to the people in your original world? Are they still yours? And do the people in the new world truly know you? Or do they know only the version of you who belongs to that path? You might save someone in this new branch, but the version of them in the original path remains untouched, carrying the weight of the past as it originally unfolded. This duality can feel both hopeful and sorrowful. Still, the multiverse idea offers a kind of mercy that other time travel concepts do not. It whispers that you cannot destroy your original story. It will always remain intact and unbroken, like a photograph preserved in a drawer. If you change something in the past, you're not erasing yourself. You're simply stepping into another you, another story, another possibility that the universe was capable of containing. And there is something beautifully liberating in that. It means that time is not a single fragile thread that can be snipped or tangled by one mistake. It is a branching tree, always growing, always offering new directions to explore. If you look at it softly, the multiverse becomes less a scientific theory and more a metaphor for the infinite ways a life can unfold, based on courage, hesitation, chance, or choice. As we drift deeper into this forest of possibilities, we begin to see the emotional heart of the matter. Even if rewriting the past doesn't destroy anything, it still reshapes who you are and how you understand the story of your own life. If you imagine stepping into a new branch of reality, a world shaped by a choice you altered in the past, you might expect the change to feel like stepping into a slightly different room. A new picture on the wall, perhaps. A different coat hanging by the door. Small details shifted, nothing more. But identity is not a wall decoration. It is a long-form tapestry woven from memories, habits, fears, triumphs, scars, lessons, and the countless gentle nudges of experience. When you change the past, you do more than move through a different version of the world. You step into a version of yourself that may not align with the person you remember being a moment ago, and that quiet dissonance becomes its own profound, haunting question. If the past is different, who exactly are you now? Identity is often imagined as something steady, like a stone at the bottom of a river. No matter how fast the water flows, the stone remains. But in truth, identity is much more like the river itself, shaped constantly by the terrain it moves through. A childhood experience deepens a channel. A heartbreak shifts the current. A moment of compassion widens the river's path. Every experience leaves a mark. Every memory acts like a small stone guiding the flow. Change enough of those stones and the river begins to move differently. This becomes important when you imagine rewriting the past. Suppose you go back and alter a single moment, one that once caused you pain. Perhaps a harsh argument, a failure, a moment of humiliation or loss. In the original timeline, that moment might have shaped you in ways you don't always notice. Perhaps it made you more cautious or more resilient. Perhaps it softened you or hardened you. Perhaps it changed how you loved or how you trusted. Now imagine returning to a present where that moment never happened. You wake up in a world where the stone that once shaped your river is missing. The river flows differently now. You look around and everything seems familiar. The room, the people, the life you built. But you're not the same person who lived these moments originally. You carry memories from a timeline that no longer exists. Your younger self in this new branch grew without the lessons you remember. They experienced different fears, different joys, different shaping events. So the you who belongs here is not the you who travelled here. You become a visitor inside your own life. And that realization carries its own gentle ache. You might walk into the home of this new version of you and feel like a guest. The photos on the wall reflect a smile that feels almost, but not quite, like your own. The handwriting on the notes beside the fridge looks familiar, but the tone behind the words feels slightly different. Your friends recognize you, but they respond to a personality you no longer inhabit. They speak to the version of you who grew up inside this altered stream, not to the traveller who arrived with memories of a world that now sits like mist behind a closed window. One of the most delicate parts of this dissonance comes from relationships. The smallest change in your past could alter how you connect with others. Maybe someone you once loved deeply never met you in this branch. Or maybe you did meet, but under different circumstances that change the tone of your bond. Perhaps you're closer here, or more distant. Perhaps they confided in you in ways they never did in your original timeline. Or perhaps the trust you once shared so naturally must now be rebuilt from unfamiliar ground. You may also find that the skills you acquired through struggle in your original life no longer emerged in this branch. Perhaps you once learned patience by enduring a difficult period, and without that difficulty you now live quicker, less steady. Perhaps you once learned courage from a moment of fear, and without that moment you now hesitate in ways that confuse even yourself. The strengths you earned through hardship might not exist here. They belong to a version of you who no longer fits the world you've stepped into. This raises an unsettling but important question. If rewriting the past creates a new version of you, what happens to the you who would have lived in this altered branch naturally? They never get to exist. They never get to tell their version of the story. Their place in the world is replaced by the traveller who arrived from another timeline, and even if the universe permits this gently, the emotional weight of it remains. You're living in someone else's outline, wearing a life that might have been theirs, not yours. Imagine waking up one morning and finding that someone has rearranged your furniture overnight. The room is still yours, but something is off. You cannot quite place what changed, but you can feel it. Your hand reaches for a drawer that is no longer there. Your eyes search for a familiar object that has been moved. Living in a rewritten timeline feels like this, but on a deeper level. The furniture of your life has shifted. People, emotions, memories, habits. They look familiar enough to function, but strange enough to unbalance your sense of self. There is also a soft melancholy in knowing that the experiences that shaped your empathy, your resilience, your humour, your tenderness may never have happened in this new world. You carry them with you like invisible luggage, pieces of a story that unfolded elsewhere. And while those memories still guide you, no one around you shares them. They only know the version of you who belongs to this branch, not the version who travelled across time to arrive here. And yet, identity is resilient. Even if the river's path is altered, the water continues to flow. You find new meanings, new connections, new ways to inhabit the changed landscape of your life. But this process takes time, patience, and a willingness to accept that the version of you who left the original timeline cannot ever truly return. Not because the door is closed, but because the self who crossed its threshold is not the self the world expects to see. This is the emotional cost of rewriting your past, not the unravelling of the universe, but the quiet unravelling of who you are and who you might have become. And as we drift forward, another question begins to surface. If changing the past reshapes your identity so profoundly, how does it affect the lives of everyone else whose stories intertwine with yours? One of the gentlest illusions we hold about time is the belief that our lives are mostly self-contained, that our joys, mistakes, and private decisions affect only a small circle around us. But when you look more closely, you begin to see that human lives are connected like threads in a vast, intricate fabric. Move one thread, and the tension shifts across the entire weave. Rearranging a single stitch might change the pattern that appears on the other side. Time travel, when viewed through this quiet truth, becomes far less personal and far more communal. Changing your past does not only change you, It changes the lives of everyone who ever brushed against yours, even in the smallest way. To grasp this gently, imagine a river flowing through a valley. Along its banks, villages rise, fields are watered, and countless lives depend on its course. If someone in the distant past had nudged a single stone in the river's path, redirecting the flow by even a small margin, the valley today might look entirely different. A village that exists in your memory might never have been built. A family line could have shifted elsewhere. Generations of people might have lived and died under different circumstances. That stone, tiny and insignificant when first moved, becomes the quiet cause of countless unseen effects. Now apply this image to your own story. Suppose you return to a moment of deep regret, perhaps a choice that once caused pain to you or someone you loved, and you gently change it. You may feel relief, you may feel at peace, but time's river does not belong only to you. The moment you move your stone, the current downstream changes for others. Imagine a simple scenario. You go back to the day you turned down a job that made you miserable in your original timeline. This time, you accept it. In the altered branch, you might thrive, form friendships, or discover talents you never knew you had. But the person who originally took the job after you declined it now goes in a different direction. They move to a new city, they meet different friends, they fall in love with someone else entirely. That new love leads to a child who would not have existed in your original world. Meanwhile, someone else who once benefited from your presence now loses that connection. A small shift, and dozens of lives are touched. This is the heart of the ripple effect. Your life is not a closed pond. It is an ocean connected to every shore. We rarely notice these connections in daily life. A small kindness offered at a supermarket might lift someone's mood just enough for them to reach out to a friend they were drifting away from. A moment of impatience might cause someone to leave a gathering early, changing the sequence of conversations they would have had. Life is sensitive, delicate, full of hidden hinges. Even without time travel, the ripple effect is always present, but travelling into the past magnifies it in ways that are impossible to predict. Now imagine a moment where you choose to save someone from suffering. Perhaps you return to prevent a friend from experiencing a heartbreak that once scarred them. In the altered timeline, they never undergo that pain. They never learn the lessons that came from it. The resilience they once built is now missing. The empathy they developed through struggle does not take root. They live a different life, one that may be smoother on the surface but less grounded in strength, and that shift affects every interaction they have from that moment forward. These changes don't have to be negative. Some may lead to better futures, but even positive ripples reshape countless other lives. If you help someone avoid a tragedy, the people they would have comforted afterward never have that moment of deep companionship. If you prevent someone's failure, the person who would have succeeded because of that vacancy now goes another way. Preventing one sadness may allow another sadness to appear elsewhere, not because the universe is cruel, but because it is interconnected. This brings us to a quiet ethical question. Who owns the past? Is it yours to change simply because you lived through it? Or does it belong equally to everyone who shared its consequences? Friends, strangers, entire communities shaped by outcomes you once considered small. When you hold this question gently, you begin to see the past, not as a personal diary you can revise, but as a shared history whose pages are written by countless hands. Changing even one paragraph might alter stories that were never yours to touch. Another question follows softly behind it. Does a better world for you justify a worse world for others? Imagine you prevent your past heartbreak, but in doing so prevent the series of events that once brought someone else hope. Imagine you avoid embarrassment, but in doing so deny a stranger the chance to step forward and create the connection that once changed their life. You may never know whom you affect, and that unknowing becomes its own emotional weight. To picture this ethically, imagine standing on the edge of a pond whose surface reflects the sky. You toss a pebble into the water, and ripples move outward until they reach the very edges. You focus on the circle closest to you, believing that is all you changed. But the farthest ripples matter too, even if you never see them. This interconnectedness creates a quiet tension. On one hand, the desire to heal your past is deeply human. On the other, the realization that doing so might harm others, even unintentionally, wraps the decision in a soft, heavy responsibility. A gentle metaphor may help. Imagine rearranging stones in a riverbed to improve the flow of water for yourself. The water running around your feet becomes clearer, gentler. But downstream, the changing current makes the bank erode slightly faster. Further still, a fish resting behind a stone now loses its shelter. A great distance away, a plant that once drank from a stable pool now receives less nourishment. You changed nothing violently. You meant no harm. Yet the effects travel quietly across the entire valley. Rewriting the past is like rearranging those stones. The effects may be invisible to you, but they are real. And beneath all these reflections lies a deeper emotional truth. If helping yourself means harming someone else, someone who never had a say in your choice, can you still return to your new future with peace in your heart? These questions do not condemn time travel. Rather, they illuminate its weight. They show that rewriting the past is not a selfish act, but a shared responsibility. And with that responsibility comes the recognition that even if you can control your own path, you cannot control the ripple your presence leaves in the lives of others. As we drift onward, we come to a more personal consequence, one that arises not from changing others, but from the shock of returning to a present that no longer knows you. When people imagine returning from a journey into the past, they often picture it like stepping back into a familiar room after a long trip. The furniture is still there, the scent is still there, the world greets them with open arms, unchanged and waiting. But if you rewrite even the smallest thread of your past, the present you return to may no longer resemble the one you left behind. Your home is still a home, yes, but the rooms have shifted. The pictures on the walls may be different. The voices you expect to hear might never have echoed there. And this quiet, unsettling disorientation has a name, though it doesn't need technical language to describe it. You can simply think of it as temporal shock, the experience of stepping into a version of reality that recognizes itself but does not recognize you. Imagine walking up to your own front door, the place you've returned to countless nights. You turn the knob, expecting that familiar creak, that exact breath of air that always greeted you. But when the door opens, something in the atmosphere feels off, like stepping into a stage set designed to resemble your home without fully capturing its soul. The furniture looks a little too new. A framed picture on the mantel is missing. The coat hanging by the stairs is the wrong colour. You might stand there for a moment, wondering whether these details were always this way and your memory is playing tricks, or whether you have truly crossed into a version of your life that grew without you. This feeling deepens when you see the people who belong to this altered present. A friend greets you with a warmth that feels genuine but unfamiliar, as though they're responding to a version of you that lived a different set of days. Their questions carry assumptions you don't share. The rhythm of your conversations feels subtly wrong, like dancing to music that's a beat ahead of you. You smile, answer, nod, but a small ache grows beneath your ribs. They're speaking to the person who belongs here, not to the traveller you became. Now picture meeting someone you once loved, a partner, a friend, a sibling. You expect your shared memories to act as a bridge, but instead you find gaps where the bridge should be. Perhaps they don't recall the night you talked under the stars, because in this timeline, that starry walk never happened. Perhaps they remember a fight you never lived through. Perhaps in this branch you drifted apart years earlier, and you stand before them as a stranger wearing a familiar face. You might feel as though you're speaking to a ghost, except the ghost is you, the version who belonged here before you altered the past. It's not that these people have been taken from you. They're still here, breathing, smiling, existing in their own fullness. But their connection to you has shifted, and you cannot reach back through the altered past and retrieve the bond you once had. You carry memories like a map folded in your pocket, but the roads in this world don't match the markings on the page. You know how the conversation used to flow. You know the inside jokes. You know the quiet rituals of care. But here, they never happened. And the warmth you feel toward them may not be reflected back, because you are carrying a shared history that only one of you remembers. This creates a strange, silent kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the loneliness of being emotionally out of place. Like walking through a dream version of your life, where familiar faces greet you, yet you feel yourself floating slightly above the floorboards, unable to fully touch the ground. The shock deepens when you notice how achievements you once cherished are gone. Maybe you no longer have the degree you fought for, because the rewritten timeline led you down a different path. Perhaps the book you wrote was never published because you never met the person who encouraged you to write it. Perhaps your career branched toward a different city. Perhaps you never learned the skill that once defined you. These absences do not appear as dramatic voids. They appear as quiet changes, small differences in how the world responds to you. You stand in a life shaped by choices you did not make. The emotional weight of this realization is heavy but quiet. You are not mourning a lost world. You are mourning your place in it. You are the traveller who remembers a story that no longer exists, and there is no one who can confirm the truth you carry. You might try to explain these memories to someone, but they would hear them as dreams or metaphors. No matter how gently you describe the timeline you left behind, they cannot step into it. You alone remember it. This is where temporal shock turns inward. The question arises softly. If the world you return to is different, how do you find your footing again? You might even ask yourself whether the change you made in the past was worth the price of losing familiarity in the present. A gentle analogy can help. Imagine waking in a house where someone has moved the furniture just enough that you keep reaching for things that aren't there. The walls are the same, the windows are the same, the house is undeniably yours. Yet every gesture you make is just slightly wrong. You bump into a table that wasn't in your way before. You open a drawer expecting utensils but find it empty. You walk to a shelf for a book that, in this version of reality, you never bought. The house didn't change violently, it shifted quietly. And those quiet shifts unsettle the deepest parts of you. Even your habits may feel off. Maybe you once developed resilience through hardship that no longer happened. Maybe you were once shaped by grief you prevented this time. Without those shaping experiences, your emotional responses may feel unfamiliar, even to yourself. The version of you that grew naturally in this timeline may have different values, different triggers, different strengths. As a traveller, you carry traits forged in a different world. A world with different storms, different lessons. You are both yourself and not yourself. This disorientation does not mean you cannot find stability again. Human beings are adaptable, and the heart is more resilient than we often believe. But temporal shock is a reminder that identity and belonging are woven from shared time. When you change the past, you don't just change events, you change the connections those events created. This leads to a quieter, more intimate question. If the world you return to no longer mirrors the one you knew, and no one around you remembers the original timeline except you. How do you find your way back to feeling at home? That question brings us closer to the deepest emotional cost of altering the past, the loneliness of carrying a history that no longer exists. There is a particular kind of loneliness that does not come from being alone in a room or walking down an empty street at night. It comes instead from carrying a truth no one else can hold, from remembering a world that no longer exists and knowing you are the only witness left. This is the quiet burden that settles on anyone who rewrites the past and then returns to the present. The realization that the memories you carry are invisible to everyone around you, the warmth of shared moments, the weight of shared hardships, the laughter, the grief, the lessons. None of these belong to the people who now fill your life. They belong to a different version of them, in a different version of the world. Imagine sitting with a close friend, someone who once knew you deeply, in the timeline you left behind. You recall with perfect clarity the night you stayed up together sharing secrets, the time they comforted you, the years of history you built through small gestures and honest conversations. But here, in this new version of the present, they might look at you with polite familiarity, as if they recognize your face but cannot quite see the person behind it. Their smile is gentle, but the warm current of shared memory is missing. You tell a story from your old timeline, about the cafe you once visited together or the summer trip you took, and they listen as though you're describing a dream that belonged to someone else. This is the first layer of the loneliness, the soft ache of asymmetry. You remember them, but they do not remember you, not the you who lived those moments, not the you who walked those paths. The connection is one-sided, like reaching for someone in the dark and finding only air. It is not rejection, it is simply absence. The second layer is quieter but deeper, the knowledge that the world you left behind continues without you. Somewhere, in another branch of time's vast forest, your original present still unfolds. The people you loved still walk its paths. They still remember you, the version of you shaped by their presence. They still carry the warmth of the moment you shared. That version of the world is still alive, but you are no longer part of it. You stepped out of that story to write a different one, and now you can never return. It's like standing outside a house in the evening and seeing silhouettes move behind the curtains. You recognize the gestures, the familiar rhythm of their voices, the glow of their laughter. But you're on the other side of the glass now, watching a life that used to be yours. And no matter how softly you knock, the door to that version of time no longer opens. A tender metaphor might help. Imagine you once owned a beloved book, one filled with notes in the margins and small drawings you made during long afternoons. You gave it away one day, sending it into the world with a friend who needed comfort. Years later, you find another copy of the same book. The words inside are identical, but the margins are blank. All the personal history, all your scribbles, all your quiet thoughts written in small handwriting at the bottom of each page, they are missing. The story is there, but the life inside it is not. This is what returning to a rewritten present feels like. The pages are clean, and the absence of your old markings stings in a soft, private way. This loneliness deepens when you meet people whose lives were intertwined with yours in the original timeline. Perhaps someone who once shaped your character no longer plays that role here. Perhaps someone who once relied on you has no memory of your support. Perhaps a person you once hurt carries no wound from you now, and yet you remember the apology you gave them, the lesson you learned. These mismatches create small emotional tremors, like waking from a vivid dream and struggling to reconcile the dream's intensity with the stillness of the morning light. What makes this loneliness particularly heavy? is that it cannot be shared. If you were to tell someone in this altered world about the timeline you came from, they might listen with kindness, curiosity, or confusion, but they could not meet you inside that memory. They cannot recall a world that never shaped them. You could describe the exact scent of the rain that fell on a day you shared. But here, that day never happened. You could describe the sound of their laughter during a childhood moment. But here, their childhood took a different path. Your memories become like stories from another universe, real to you but unattached to the lives around you. And yet, this loneliness is not purely sorrowful. There is a soft beauty in holding memories that belong to no one else. They become precious artifacts of a life that only you remember, like tiny seashells collected from a beach erased by the tide. You carry them not because the world around you can validate them, but because they are part of your emotional landscape, shaping your inner world even if they no longer shape your outer one. Still, there is a point where the weight becomes too much to hold alone, and you must find a way to make peace with the ghost-like nature of your recollections. You can imagine those lost moments as lanterns floating on a lake at night, each one glowing softly, drifting into the distance. They do not disappear, but they no longer guide your steps. They remain gentle reminders of where you've been, not directives for where you must go. In this acceptance, you begin to feel something else, closure. You realize that the past you remember was real, even if it is not part of the world you now inhabit. The love you gave was real. The forgiveness you offered was real. The lessons you learned were real. And the version of the world where those moments happened is not gone. It is simply out of reach, continuing on its own quiet branch somewhere beyond your sight. Acceptance does not erase loneliness, but it softens it. It reminds you that life, whether rewritten or original, always moves forward, and at some point, you must move with it. As we drift further, this lesson begins to lead naturally to a gentler understanding that perhaps the greatest strength comes not from controlling the past, but from accepting it and grounding yourself tenderly in the present moment that is still yours to shape. There comes a point in this long, drifting journey through time, through its loops, its contradictions, its alluring dangers, when something inside you begins to soften. You start to feel that perhaps the past is not a prison you must escape, nor a wound you must heal by altering its shape. Instead, it becomes something quieter, something steady, something that gave you form in ways you didn't fully understand until now. In this gentle light, the past transforms from a cage into a foundation, from a burden into a quiet teacher. To understand this softly, imagine your life as a river winding through a landscape. Along the riverbed lie countless stones, some smooth, some sharp, some heavy, some translucent, some forgotten under the deeper currents. Each stone is a past moment, a joy, a mistake, a loss, a lesson, a fleeting choice that once felt insignificant. The river flows the way it does not despite these stones, but because of them, they direct its current, carve its curves, create gentle pools where the water rests, and narrow rapids where it rushes forward. You might wish to remove a stone that once cut your foot, but without that stone, the river's path would be different. And the river you know today, the river that is you, would not exist in the same way. This metaphor isn't meant to romanticize pain. Life contains real wounds, and some moments are so heavy they leave cracks in the heart. But even those cracks become part of the vessel that holds your resilience. You learn to navigate sorrow, to forgive, to heal, to stand up again. You became someone who carries compassion because you've tasted loss, someone who carries patience because you've known frustration, someone who carries wisdom because you've lived through mistakes. Changing those moments might remove their sting, but it would also erase the strengths that grew quietly in their shadow. In this gentle understanding, the unchangeable past begins to appear not as a limitation, but as a stabilizing force, like the ancient roots of a tree. You grow upward because your roots hold you steady. The storms you survive taught your trunk how to bend without breaking. The droughts taught your leaves how to conserve their light. The seasons shaped you in ways that, at the time, felt harsh, but later revealed their purpose: resilience, empathy, depth. Another way to imagine this is to think of your life as a long scroll of parchment, written day by day. Some lines are smudged, some paragraphs feel embarrassing, some chapters end abruptly or painfully. And yet, when you unroll the scroll and look at it from a distance, you see that it forms a cohesive narrative. Every awkward line, every unexpected twist, every moment of heartbreak or victory creates a rhythm that belongs uniquely to you. If you try to erase the parts you dislike, the rhythm falters, the story unravels, the meaning, fragile and hard-won, dissolves. This is the quiet strength of an unchangeable past. It gives your story shape. In the modern world, we often feel the weight of choices, the pressure to be perfect, the temptation to rewrite our missteps. Yet many philosophies and gentle practices like mindfulness remind us that the present moment is where life actually occurs, not in the what-ifs behind you, but in the possibilities unfolding right now. Mindfulness teaches us not to erase what has happened, but to accept it as part of the landscape that delivered us to the present shore. You can imagine this acceptance as standing by a still lake at dusk. The surface reflects everything around it: trees, sky, clouds, your own silhouette. If you try to disturb the reflection, the water ripples. But if you stand quietly and let the surface settle, you begin to see the reflection for what it is, not something to correct, but something to understand. The past is the reflection on the lake. You cannot change it, but you can learn from it, honor it, and let it guide you. Acceptance does not mean resignation. It means choosing to live in the present without carrying the restless ache of wanting to alter what cannot be changed. It means letting yourself breathe into the life you have, with all its imperfections and unexpected beauty. It means recognizing that the person you are today carries the imprint of every moment you have lived, every joy, every failure, every fear, every triumph. And that person deserves compassion, not revision. There's also a quiet comfort in knowing that the past is fixed. If the past were fluid, if it could be rewritten endlessly, you might feel an overwhelming pressure to improve it, to perfect it, to erase every flaw. You might become trapped in an endless cycle of adjusting and correcting, like a painter who never finishes a canvas because they keep reworking the same corner. A fixed past frees you from that cycle. It anchors you. It allows you to grow forward rather than backwards. When the past cannot be changed, you begin to ask different questions. Not, how do I undo what happened, but what can I create from here? This shift in perspective is powerful. It turns pain into strength, mistakes into wisdom, and regret into motivation. It reminds you that your life is not defined by the chapters behind you, but by the ones you have yet to write. Every day becomes a blank page that belongs wholly to you. And now, as our journey through time drifts gently toward its end, this realization leads naturally to one final truth: quiet, profound, and always close at hand. The present moment is the only time machine you will ever truly need. As we reach the final drift of this long journey through time, through memories, paradoxes, loops, branching paths, and the quiet ache of rewritten worlds, we arrive at a place both familiar and profound: the present moment. It sits here with you now, gentle as a warm cup resting between your hands. It doesn't demand anything. It doesn't argue. It simply waits, offering itself as the one place where your breath, your choices, and your life truly unfold. For all the wonder surrounding time travel, the present moment has always been the truest form of it. Every step forward is a journey into the unknown. Every decision alters the shape of what comes next. Every thought ripples outward into a future you have not yet met. Without machines, without loops, without wormholes or branching universes, you are already shaping tomorrow. And this quiet power is far more stable and far more compassionate than any attempt to rewrite the past. To understand this softly, picture time as a long garden path stretching out beneath a canopy of leaves. The past lies behind you like stepping stones already crossed, solid, permanent, weathered by rain and memory. Ahead lies a path still covered in morning mist, its stones not yet placed. And beneath your feet is the one stone you stand on now, smooth, certain, real. It is the only stone you can touch, the only stone you can shape. When you move to the next one, the mist shifts, and the stone forms gently beneath your weight. The present moment is the place where the path is built. This perspective doesn't erase the desire to step backward in time. There will always be moments you wish you could revisit, loved ones you miss, decisions you wish you had made differently, kind words you wish you had said. But the more you explore the landscape of time travel and its delicate consequences, the more clearly you see that the past is not a problem to be solved. It is a foundation to be understood. It is the seedbed that gave rise to the present, with all its imperfections and quiet beauties. The present moment offers something the past never can, the ability to act. In the past, you can only watch. In the future, you can only imagine. But now, right now, you can shape, choose, forgive, apologize, begin again, reach out, or let go. Even the smallest action in the present can ripple outward in ways more powerful than rewriting a distant memory. A gentle truth spoken today might heal a wound you once believed permanent. A small act of kindness might shift the course of another person's story in ways you'll never fully see. A single new habit created now might alter the entire arc of your future. In this way, the present becomes not just a moment, but a doorway, one that leads to every possible tomorrow. This idea becomes even more tender when we consider how much of life happens quietly. A thoughtful message sent to a friend, a deep breath taken in the middle of frustration, a choice to rest instead of push, a moment of gratitude whispered to yourself when you notice something beautiful, a shaft of light on the floor, the sound of rain, the warmth of someone's presence. These small acts don't require rewriting the past, they rewrite the tone of the future. You can think of the present moment as a small glowing lantern cupped gently in your hands. The past is behind you like a long tunnel, dark in some places, bright in others, but the lantern cannot illuminate what has already been walked. It can only shine on the steps ahead, and when you move forward, the light comes with you. It does not erase the shadows behind, it simply makes them part of the scenery you learned from. Some people imagine that happiness lies in correcting what went wrong before, but often happiness lies in embracing what is right now, the chance to love more deeply, to forgive yourself more gently, to make different choices with the clarity you possess today. The wisdom you carry did not appear by accident. It is the quiet accumulation of every moment you have lived, the painful ones included. If you could return to the past and remove those difficult moments, you might lose the very wisdom you now use to guide your life. And so, the present moment becomes the place where past and future meet, forming a balance that neither can hold alone. It is an intersection of everything you have been and everything you are becoming. You might picture it like standing on a small cliff overlooking a valley. Behind you lies a winding trail, filled with footprints and soft indentations, evidence of your journey. Ahead lies a landscape filled with birdsong, fog, morning light, and countless branching paths. You cannot return to the trail behind you and change the ground, but you can step forward with intention, allowing the wind to carry your next steps into new spaces. This is why so many philosophies, from ancient traditions to modern mindfulness, remind us gently that presence is a form of power. To be here, fully, is to engage with life where it is most alive. When you breathe deeply and let the moment settle into your body, something softens inside you. The pressure to rewrite your history begins to fade. The ache of regret loosens. The fear of the unknown future quiets. What remains is a stillness that contains clarity, an understanding that the past is fixed so the present can be free. And within that freedom is the real time machine, your capacity to shape what comes next with intention. You can repair relationships not by rewriting their origins, but by tending to them now. You can pursue dreams not by altering the day you first hesitated, but by choosing courage today. You can heal your heart not by erasing its old wounds, but by offering it gentleness in this very breath. The present moment is not the consolation prize for those who cannot travel in time. It is the quiet miracle at the centre of every timeline, a place where you can grow, create, restore, and choose new beginnings. And so, as this journey through time settles into silence, you may feel something inside you shift, a soft understanding that the past is a story, the future is a possibility, and the present is your canvas. Whatever you paint here becomes the next chapter, written not by altering what has been, but by embracing what is. Here, in this gentle moment, you're exactly where time invites you to be.